I was 28 when I realized that everything I understood about fighting was fundamentally incomplete. Not wrong, incomplete. This recognition didn't come during a tournament or a street confrontation. It came in absolute stillness, 3 hours into a private training session when I had pushed beyond exhaustion. In that moment of clarity, I understood why some fighters with perfect technique remained mediocre, while others with seemingly flawed methods achieved greatness. The difference wasn't in what they did. It was in the dimensions they operated within. Most people watching my films or demonstrations assumed they were seeing the result of superior physical training. They analyzed my speed, my power, my techniques. Studios marketed me as the fastest hands in the East. Critics discussed my physical conditioning. Even my students primarily focused on the visible aspects of my ability. What no one realized, and what I chose not to explain, was that the physical dimension represented only 1/4 of my actual training. One component in a system I developed privately and never shared completely. A system I came to call dimensional training. Consider this. When someone throws a punch at you, what are they actually throwing? Most would say a fist. A more sophisticated answer might be that they're projecting force or energy, but both answers remain trapped in the physical dimension. The truth I discovered through intensive private experimentation was that human performance exists simultaneously in 4 interlocking dimensions: the physical dimension of bodies in space, the emotional dimension of intent and drive, the intellectual dimension of strategy and adaptation, and the energetic dimension where boundaries between beings become permeable. When I fought, I wasn't merely operating with superior physical tools. I was functioning across all 4 dimensions simultaneously. This integration created capabilities that appeared supernatural to those perceiving only the physical realm. For years, I've withheld this system, not to maintain advantage, but because expressing it required language most weren't ready to hear. Fragments appeared in my writings and interviews, but the complete framework remained private. Today, I'll share the actual foundation that underlies everything you've seen me do. Not through metaphors or philosophy, but through the specific training methodologies I developed to transcend conventional limits. First, we must understand why traditional approaches to mastery, even the most sophisticated ones, remain fundamentally constrained. When I first came to America, I carried with me exceptional physical training from my years in Hong Kong. I had speed, I had power, I had technique. I defeated opponents consistently. And yet something fundamental was missing. In private moments, I felt a ceiling, an invisible barrier that pure physicality could not break through. I remember a specific night in 1964. I had been training for 8 hours straight, perfecting a sequence of movements until every muscle fiber responded with machine-like precision. My body was performing exactly as commanded, yet the results remained ordinary. Technical excellence without transcendence. I threw my equipment across the room in frustration. This frustration wasn't unique to me. Look at the martial arts world. Thousands of practitioners with decades of physical training who remain mediocre. Perfect form without perfect function. Why? Because conventional martial arts, regardless of style, overwhelmingly focus on a single dimension, the physical. They train the body as if it was separate from the mind. They train techniques as if fights unfold according to patterns. They condition muscles while ignoring the systems that activate them. Most critically, they fragment what should be unified. My breakthrough came unexpectedly. I was sparring with a senior boxer who, by all physical metrics, I should have dominated easily. Yet he anticipated my movements with uncanny accuracy. During one exchange, I launched a perfectly executed combination that should have been indefensible. He not only defended, but countered as if he had rehearsed specifically for my attack. Afterward, I asked him how he had read me so effectively. His answer changed everything. I wasn't reading your body. I was reading your intention. That night, I began systematically deconstructing the training methodologies I had inherited. I realized that what we perceive as physical mastery in the greatest fighters isn't superior physical development at all. It's dimensional harmony, the seamless integration of multiple systems operating as one. Think about it this way. When two fighters of equal physical ability face each other, what determines the outcome? Conventional wisdom points to superior strategy, better timing, or greater will. But these are merely fragments of a larger truth. The actual determinant is dimensional advantage, the ability to operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously while your opponent remains trapped in one or two. This creates asymmetric capability that appears as superior speed or power, but is actually superior integration. Over the next 7 years, I developed a training system that deliberately cultivates this integration. What appears to observers as extraordinary physical capability is actually ordinary physical ability expressed through extraordinary dimensional harmony. This system has 3 core components, each targeting a specific aspect of dimensional integration. I call these components perceptual triangulation, intention action compression, and adaptive resonance. Together, they form the foundation of what I privately term dimensional training. Let me explain the first component, perceptual triangulation, which fundamentally transforms how you perceive reality itself. The first component of my private system I call perceptual triangulation, the ability to perceive reality from multiple reference points simultaneously. This isn't merely observation. It's a fundamental recalibration of awareness itself. Most fighters perceive from a single point of reference, their own. They watch their opponent's movements, analyze patterns, and respond accordingly. Even at the highest levels, this creates an inherent delay between perception and action. You see, then you respond. I discovered this limitation during an intense training period in 1967. I had been experimenting with blindfolded sensitivity drills for weeks, pushing the boundaries of non-visual perception. One night, after 6 hours of continuous practice, something unexpected occurred. I began sensing not just my training partner's movements, but the intent preceding them. At first, I dismissed this as coincidence or heightened intuition. But as I systematically explored this phenomenon, I realized I had stumbled upon something profound, the ability to occupy multiple perceptual positions simultaneously, not just observing my opponent, but experiencing reality partially from within their perspective while maintaining my own. This sounds mystical, but it's entirely practical. Consider this. Every action begins with intention before manifesting physically. There's a microscopic gap between deciding to move and actually moving. Most fighters are trained to detect the movement. I developed the ability to detect the intention. I refined this through what I called 3-point awareness cultivation. The exercise begins with placing 3 objects in a triangle around you. Instead of focusing on each sequentially, you develop peripheral awareness of all 3 simultaneously. Then you replace objects with training partners who attack unpredictably. The goal isn't to watch for physical movement, but to expand awareness to encompass the entire triangle as a unified field. With practice, this expands from external awareness to internal sensitivity. You begin perceiving subtle shifts in energy, minute muscular preparations, and intention formation in others. Eventually, you develop the ability to simultaneously perceive from your position, your opponent's position, and a neutral third position. True triangulation. The practical application is extraordinary. In combat, this allowed me to anticipate movements before physical tells were visible. It compressed reaction time to the point where observers assumed I had superhuman speed. But I wasn't moving faster. I was perceiving earlier. You've actually seen this demonstrated, though you didn't recognize it. In Enter the Dragon, There's a scene where my character faces 3 opponents simultaneously. Watch carefully how I respond to attacks from outside my visual field. This wasn't choreography. It was perceptual triangulation in application. I was responding to intentions rather than movements. But I must warn you, attempting to develop this capability without proper foundation is dangerous. Many who tried reported perceptual distortions, disorientation, and inability to function in normal awareness afterwards. The mind requires specific preparation to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without fragmentation. The first stage of preparation involves what I call perceptual isolation, training each sensory channel independently before integration. You must first dismantle conventional perception before reconstructing a more expanded awareness. This deconstruction process destabilizes reality as you've known it, a necessary but potentially disorienting transition. This leads us naturally to the second component of my system, intention-action compression, which builds upon perceptual triangulation to eliminate the gap between decision and execution. The second component of my system addresses a fundamental limitation in human performance that most fighters never recognize, let alone overcome: the neurological gap between decision and action. Consider this. When you decide to throw a punch, there's a measurable delay before your body executes the movement. This gap exists in every fighter, regardless of skill level. Scientists measure it in milliseconds, but in combat, milliseconds determine outcomes. This delay isn't just physical, it's neurological. The time required for electrical impulses to travel from brain to muscle, for motor units to activate, for momentum to generate. Through systematic self-observation, I discovered something revolutionary. This delay isn't fixed. It can be systematically reduced through specific training. What most consider a biological constant is actually a variable. My breakthrough came while studying high-speed footage of my own movements in 1968. I noticed minute hesitations, imperceptible at normal speed, between initiating and executing techniques. These micro-delays accumulated into significant inefficiencies. I became obsessed with eliminating them. Over 18 months of intensive experimentation, I developed a 3-stage compression method that I never shared publicly. Phase 1, decision point fragmentation. Most techniques contain multiple decision points, moments where the brain must confirm the next micro-movement. By isolating and identifying each decision point within a technique, you can eliminate unnecessary neural negotiations. I developed a drilling method using electrical timing systems that delivered mild shocks when decision hesitation occurred. This created immediate feedback, forcing the nervous system to consolidate decision points. Phase 2, neural pathway saturation. Once decision points are minimized, you must establish dedicated neural pathways through what I called threshold training. This involves executing the same movement pattern with increasing intensity until the neural pathway reaches saturation point, the threshold at which conscious monitoring becomes impossible, and the system must commit to automated execution. Most fighters never reach this threshold, remaining in the zone of conscious control where delays persist. Phase 3, temporal compression. The final phase involves manipulating subjective time perception during execution. Through specialized breathing techniques synchronized with movement, I developed the ability to expand subjective time experience while maintaining objective speed. This creates the neural space to process information without introducing physical delay. The opponent experiences your movement as instantaneous while you experience it as deliberate. Let me share a specific exercise I developed. I constructed a timing device using a modified metronome and light sensor that would emit signals at decreasing intervals. Starting with intervals matching my natural execution speed, I would perform a technique in response to each signal. As intervals shortened, the nervous system was forced to compress response time. When failure occurred, I would maintain that threshold until adaptation occurred, then decrease the interval further. The most visible application of this principle was my 1-inch punch. Most observers focus on the power generated from minimal distance, but the true principle being demonstrated was intention-action compression. By eliminating the gap between deciding to strike and executing the strike, the punch arrived before the opponent's defensive system could activate. The compression of intent and action into a unified event was the actual secret. This principle transformed my film fight choreography as well. Watch carefully in Fist of Fury. There are sequences where my counters begin before my opponent's attacks finish. This wasn't simply choreographed speed. It was intentional demonstration of compressed response time. While audiences marveled at the visual effect, they were actually witnessing intention-action compression in application. This component builds directly upon perceptual triangulation. Once you perceive intention before movement, intention-action compression allows you to respond to that perception without delay. Together, they create a system where you're responding to what will happen rather than what has happened, operating ahead of objective time rather than within it. This brings us to the third component of my system, adaptive resonance, which transforms how you interact with opposing energy. The third component of my system transcends what most understand as adaptability. I call it adaptive resonance. While adaptability is reactive, changing in response to circumstances, resonance is interactive. It creates synchronization between systems that appear separate but are fundamentally connected. I discovered this principle not through combat, but through music. In 1969, I was experimenting with movement to different rhythms when I noticed something peculiar. When moving to certain frequencies, my energy expenditure decreased dramatically while my power output increased. This wasn't a matter of technique or timing, it was resonance. This observation led me to investigate resonant phenomena across different domains: physics, music, engineering, even architecture. I discovered that when systems vibrate at compatible frequencies, energy transfers between them with minimal loss. Applied to combat, this principle was revolutionary. Through extensive experimentation, I identified 3 distinct levels of resonance that could be systematically developed. Level 1, environmental resonance. This involves harmonizing with your surroundings, the surface beneath you, the air around you, the acoustic properties of the space. Most fighters ignore these elements, creating subtle resistance. By calibrating your movement to resonate with environmental factors, you eliminate this resistance. In demonstrations where I broke boards suspended in air, I wasn't striking harder. I was achieving perfect resonance with the board's natural frequency, requiring minimal force to create maximum effect. Level 2, opponent resonance. This is the ability to synchronize with opposing energy systems. Every fighter produces rhythms, in breathing, in movement patterns, in attention cycles. By detecting these rhythms and establishing resonance, you can influence them. When 2 pendulums hang near each other, the larger will eventually impose its rhythm on the smaller, a principle called entrainment. In combat, by establishing stronger rhythmic presence, you can entrain your opponent's systems to your own, effectively controlling their timing without their awareness. Level 3, internal resonance. The most advanced application involves synchronizing all internal systems, cardiovascular, respiratory, neurological, muscular, into perfect harmony. Most people operate with subtle internal conflicts. The breath fights the movement, the mind races ahead of the body. Tension exists where relaxation is needed. By achieving internal resonance, all systems amplify rather than inhibit each other. Let me share a specific training method I developed called the harmonic oscillation exercise. It begins with detecting the natural oscillation frequency of different body parts, the rate at which they most efficiently move. Rather than imposing a uniform rhythm, you identify and work with these natural frequencies. Then you systematically bring disparate systems into harmonious relationship through calibrated movement sequences. Finally, you learn to match these internal harmonies with external rhythms, both environmental and interpersonal. This principle created what many perceived as superhuman strength in my demonstrations. When I could throw men twice my size across rooms, observers assumed exceptional muscular power. In reality, I was achieving momentary perfect resonance with their structure, requiring minimal energy to create maximum effect. It wasn't about force, it was about synchronization. This is precisely why I kept this principle private. In untrained hands, it creates dangerous imbalance. Attempting to manipulate resonant phenomena without proper foundation doesn't just lead to failure, it disrupts the practitioner's own systems. I've witnessed practitioners who developed neurological issues, coordination problems, even cardiac irregularities through improper application of resonant principles. Adaptive resonance completes the unified system when combined with the previous components. Perceptual triangulation allows you to detect intention before movement. Intention action compression eliminates the gap between decision and execution. Adaptive resonance then synchronizes your response with the opponent's systems, creating amplified effect with minimal energy. Together, they form a complete system operating across all 4 dimensions simultaneously. When fully integrated, these 3 components create what I call conscious automation, the final synthesis, where technique transcends into spontaneous expression. The ultimate challenge in martial mastery isn't developing techniques. It's integrating conscious technique into unconscious capability without performance degradation. Traditional training faces a fundamental paradox. Conscious attention enables precise technique but inhibits speed, while unconscious automation enables speed but sacrifices precision and adaptability. Most fighters accept this trade-off as inevitable. Either move with conscious precision but limited speed, or move with unconscious speed but limited control. Through systematic experimentation, I discovered this dichotomy is false. Automation without degradation is possible through dimensional integration, what I call conscious automation. The conventional approach to automation, endless repetition until movements become reflexive, creates what science now calls chunking. The brain groups complex movements into single units for efficiency. But this process inherently sacrifices conscious control and adaptability. The movement becomes fixed, efficient for specific scenarios, but rigid when circumstances change. I developed a 4-stage automation process that preserves both the speed of unconscious action and the precision of conscious control. Stage 1, fractional isolation. Rather than practicing whole techniques, I would deconstruct each movement into its smallest functional components and automate these fractions independently. This creates automation without sacrificing structural flexibility. For example, with the side kick, I didn't practice the complete technique until I had automated 15 distinct components, each capable of independent modification. Stage 2, dimensional transfer. Once physical components are isolated, I would transfer each component across all 4 dimensions, physically executing while emotionally modulating, intellectually monitoring, and energetically directing. This creates dimensional anchoring, preventing the technique from becoming locked in purely physical expression. Stage 3, progressive integration. Components are systematically recombined in variable sequences under increasingly challenging conditions. Unlike traditional progressive training that increases physical difficulty, this progression introduces dimensional complexity, maintaining technical precision while adding perceptual challenges, emotional pressures, strategic problems, and energetic disruptions. Stage 4, contextual liberation. The final stage involves performing the integrated technique within continuously changing contexts until execution becomes independent of circumstance. Most trained responses are context-dependent, effective in the environments where they were learned. True automation requires contextual liberation, performance quality that remains constant regardless of environment. Let me share a personal example. When developing my finger jab technique, I didn't simply practice the physical movement repeatedly. I isolated each component: the shoulder alignment, elbow positioning, wrist stability, finger structure, eye tracking, weight distribution, breathing synchronization. I automated each independently. Then I transferred each component across dimensions, physically executing while modulating emotional intensity, maintaining strategic awareness, and controlling energetic projection. Next came progressive integration, recombining components while facing multiple opponents on unstable surfaces, under strobe lights, with auditory distraction, after exhaustion. Finally, I practiced contextual liberation, performing the technique in completely foreign environments, in formal attire, immediately upon waking, while engaged in conversation, under simulated emotional distress. This created a technique that wasn't merely automatic, it was consciously automated, preserving both the speed of reflexive action and the precision of deliberate movement. This approach fundamentally differs from traditional concepts of muscle memory, which essentially bypass consciousness for speed. Conscious automation doesn't bypass consciousness. It expands it across dimensions, removing the bottleneck of sequential processing. This is the culmination point where all three previous components synthesize into a unified system. Perceptual triangulation expands awareness beyond singular perspective. Intention-action compression eliminates the gap between decision and execution. Adaptive resonance synchronizes internal and external systems. Together, they create conscious automation, technique that transcends technique, movement that transcends movement. The ultimate expression isn't a fighter with superior physical tools. It's a fully integrated human functioning across all dimensions simultaneously. This is what I sought to develop and express throughout my life. Now you might ask, how can one begin this journey? Let me offer a specific entry point accessible to anyone, regardless of physical capability. Start with what I call dimensional awareness meditation. Sit in a quiet space and focus attention on your physical body, the weight, temperature, contact points with the floor, internal sensations. After 3 minutes, shift focus to your emotional landscape. Observe the feelings present without judgment. After another 3 minutes, shift to your intellectual dimension. Notice thought patterns, assumptions, analytical processes. Finally, spend 3 minutes attending to the energetic dimension, the subtle flow of sensation that isn't quite physical, emotional, or mental. Practice this daily for 30 days, gradually increasing your ability to maintain awareness of multiple dimensions simultaneously. This foundational exercise develops the perceptual flexibility required for all further training. But I must emphasize, do not fragment this system. These principles form a whole, like facets of a single jewel. Many who studied with me sought to extract specific techniques or concepts while ignoring others. They left with fragments that, while impressive in isolation, lacked the transformative power of the integrated system. This is why you see many martial artists with exceptional physical skills who nonetheless remain limited in their expression. They've mastered components without grasping the unifying principle that gives those components meaning. The true purpose behind my private training was never to accumulate techniques, but to transcend the need for technique entirely. Technique exists because of limitation. when limitation dissolves through dimensional integration. What remains isn't better technique. It's spontaneous expression of one's true nature. This secret framework informed everything I did publicly, though I rarely explained it directly. My films weren't merely demonstrations of physical capability. They were encoded expressions of dimensional integration. My philosophical writings weren't abstract concepts. They were attempts to articulate direct experience of transcending conventional limitations. Even my most famous statement, "Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water," wasn't a poetic metaphor, but a precise technical instruction for achieving adaptive resonance. Water exemplifies perfect resonance. It synchronizes completely with whatever contains it, while maintaining its essential nature. The 4 dimensions I've shared aren't separate categories. They're aspects of a single unified reality that becomes artificially fragmented through conventional perception. Physical ability isn't separate from emotional state, intellectual clarity, or energetic presence. They're expressions of the same underlying wholeness, artificially divided by our limited awareness. The ultimate revelation isn't a technique to master, but a limitation to transcend, the illusion of separation between these dimensions. When this false boundary dissolves, extraordinary capability emerges not as something gained, but as something uncovered, your natural state without artificial constraint. I'm sharing this now because I believe humanity has reached a critical threshold. The problems we face, individually and collectively, cannot be solved through singular dimensional approaches. We need integrated awareness that encompasses the fullness of human capacity. The system I developed privately wasn't just for martial excellence. It was a method for reclaiming our innate wholeness. My friend, the secret I kept wasn't a hidden technique. It was the recognition that what we seek through endless acquisition is already present when we transcend the fragmentation of our own awareness. This has always been available to you. Now it is revealed. What you do with this revelation is your own unique expression.